Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff. I know that I always say that I'm excited about the guest, but today I literally barely slept last night because I am so excited about the conversation. When I started this podcast, I had visions of just having really open and honest conversations. And I'm so grateful for all the guests who have come before today's episodes. But today's episode in like particularly is good. Just really good. And I want to set the stage and really make sure that you know kind of our hearts here. We're going to be talking about some topics that aren't always comfortable, but they need to be said. And truly, my guest and I, our heart is to just make higher education a better place. And so I want to set the stage because this is not going to be us dumping on higher ed. This is us trying to rally, use our voices to improve the system overall. So today's guest is Kerry O'Grady. She's a professor, a scholar, an advocate for systemic improvement. She's worked with a variety of institutions over the last 10 years. So Kerry, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited.
You
So to
too.
kick,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, no, the pleasure is mine. Trust me. So to kick off this conversation, how would you describe your career in higher education in 3 words?
Thank goodness I planned this. Unexpected, challenging, and revolutionary. So, how's that for a preview for today's conversation?
I think those are really, repeat those one more time.
I settled on unexpected, challenging, and revolutionary.
That's a journey. That's a journey that you're on. Okay. So before we talk about all the deeper topics that we're going to talk about, I think it's important to, like I said, really discuss the matters of the heart to set the stage. So, what drives your passion for higher education? What keeps you fighting for the change every day despite the challenges?
Yeah, my journey started early. I knew I wanted to teach from an early age. My dad was a college instructor for over 30 years. And as a child, he used to take me to class with him and even let me correct his students' papers with quality assurance checks, of course. And that was the instructional aspect. But my interest in the systemic issues also started really as early as high school. It was ingrained in me to focus on grades and not really the learning. So I was kind of obsessed with every A I could collect and didn't learn as much as I would have if I didn't have tunnel vision. So for many years after graduate school, I was under the assumption that I was perfect because my GPA reflected that. And I got a rude awakening after college and graduate school when I didn't have the fluidity and agility to be able to be the transferred learner between student and practitioner. And that really was a wake up call for me and something that I wanted to change in higher ed as an instructor. And so I started teaching in 2009 and was determined to give students a non rote or transactional experience because I didn't want them to end up like I did. And that's really how I got into the science of teaching. And after that, I knew that I wanted to be in teacher education and I wanted to teach in a more full time capacity. And that's when I decided to go into education full time. And as I started getting into the different facets of my ever winding career from faculty to admin to department director, I started seeing things that just weren't right. And I saw that we were not serving students well, and we weren't training our instructors to do what they needed to do well. And administrators and leaders were doing a lot wrong, from lack of data driven decision making to making evaluative decisions without the evaluative data. And I didn't feel like faculty were being supported in the way that they needed to be. And I don't know if you've heard of solutionitis. It's a terrible disease, but it's when you jump to a problem without jump to solve a problem without getting to the root of the problem in the first place. And I couldn't sit back and watch that and feel good about myself going to work every day. So really that passion to make change and to do something really meaningful and valuable with my career in higher education is what drives me to continue to keep going and to make the change that we need to be sustainable in the future.
I love solutionitis as a term. My husband works in software, not cloud computing. He's going to kill me for not knowing exactly the field he works in. Cloud computing, something with a cloud, I don't know. But my entire career, I'm like, oh, we're going to try out this new tech tool. And he's like, what problem are you solving? And I'll be like, well, this tool does this and this and this. And he's like, no, not what the tool is solving. What problem do you need to solve? And is that the correct tool? And as we would work it backwards, I'm like, no, I was totally sold on this shiny new object, which is very much higher ed, right? It is shiny new objects everywhere you look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those shiny new objects just plug in curriculum, new platforms of education, all of those things, and we need to do better. We all deserve better in this space.
Totally agree. Well, thank you for sharing that. That resonates a lot with me because I was the straight A student until I got to I got to college and was like, wait. What's happening here? Do you not know me? I am a straight A student. Why?
Perfect.
Yes, yeah. My mom and dad, they love me so much. Why am I getting B's? What's happening here? So yeah, my very, very similar experience. All right. So you are known to make good trouble. I love this. I love this so much. Good trouble in higher education. And I think it's important we talk about this because there's a lot of people who don't speak up in higher education, right? It takes them a while to find their footing, or sometimes they're scared. And so I think conversations like this really help people find their footing. I know for me, it was this book called Commencement that's literally behind me on my shelf. And it was they were talking about topics that I've had in my head for so long, but never wanted to say out loud. And I'm like, wait, we're allowed to say this? We can say these things out loud? I thought we couldn't say these things out loud. I thought they had to live here. So can you tell us more, kind of about the journey for you as you began to use your voice? Was there a breaking point, or did your voice just gradually start to get louder? Metaphorically, not
Yeah.
actually.
Well, both actually, to be honest. But before anyone blacklists me from employment because they're focused on the trouble part, I just want to take a moment and channel legendary civil rights leader and Congressman John Lewis, who said good trouble is something out of the ordinary and really making a way out of no way. And also in preparation for this podcast, I asked ChatGPT to scan the internet for information about me as a troublemaker in higher education.
What did it say?
And it was so interesting to me. It pulled that Dr. Kerry O'Grady seems to embody the type of academic who holds herself to a high standard and expects the same from those around her. And this can occasionally come across as a bit intense or relentless when it comes to systems or colleagues falling short of those expectations. But it's hardly a fault of her and more of the environment that needs more accountability and reform. Can you
Drop the mic, ChatGPT.
Right? I was like, thank you, ChatGPT. That's pretty amazing. And that's kind of what I hang my hat on every day, And it's because I really believe that the advocacy that we put forth into the world and higher education will eventually come back and give us good karma and start making small changes that make a big difference. So by that definition, by those two, yes, I am a proud troublemaker in this space. And I fearlessly call out what a lot of people don't say aloud and tirelessly advocate for practices and policies and procedures that I think higher ed needs to adapt. I back down when I'm wrong. Don't get me wrong, I do. But when I changed careers, I asked myself the honest questions before I got into higher ed because I knew that I didn't want to be a Stepford wife in higher education. I knew that I didn't want to be the person who had the same job for 15 years. And there's nothing wrong with both of those things. But I said, if I was going to make the jump, what is your legacy going to be? What is going to make this career jump worth it to you? What do you want people to remember you by in this space? And I knew I was just never going to be happy in higher ed as an appeaser. and someone who sat back and watched all these things that I knew were going wrong continue to happen. And so I was really committed from early on in my career that I wanted to make long lasting change. And, my breaking point came early too, to your question. The first time, I know this is going to sound trite, but the first time someone said to me, well, that's just the way it's done in higher ed, slow, inefficient, etc. And I was like, no, that is not how life works. And what you've been conditioned to think is because we've all been brainwashed that higher education is unchangeable. And if we are in it, we need to accept it for every broken, inefficient, unjust political makeup of it, sans complaint, or we can get out. And so the cycle continues as it is, and we experience it today. But what people don't realize is that every day that we do not stand up for something in higher education that needs changing, the more we are enabling the system to continue the way that it is. We are helping others make bad decisions and make decisions that have results that impact all of the stakeholders that higher education touches on a daily basis. Now, to your last part of your question, I've been outspoken since 1983. And so I recognize that there are people in this world that might not be as comfortable as I am speaking out. And that's okay. If you're just starting to find your voice, my recommendation is always to start small and assertively. And my rule of thumb is to start this way. If something bothers you at work and it's still bothering you the next day, and it's that little, that little part of you that says, that ain't right. That doesn't feel right. We're not doing this right. Address it. Plan your points in advance, say them to the person you need to say them to, and see how you feel afterwards. If you feel better and the situation is better, that's a clear sign that you need to speak up more often because nothing terrible happened to you. And proof that angst gets resolved from talking it out is a really powerful metric. And I also want to speak to the people who are naturally outspoken and have gotten their hands slapped in higher education. It's okay. We need you more, and we need your voice more now than ever, because there are very few of us right now willing to put ourselves out there for the greater good. And it is a lonely and scary place to be. So keep writing, keep fighting, keep commenting, and keep sharing. You can always say something respectfully and meaningfully. And even if you don't get the immediate reaction for change, someone will listen to you eventually. So keep saying it.
I love that. I love that. And I think too, I was thinking about this question as well, because I used to position myself. I used to say, I'm Switzerland. I'm Switzerland. But I knew in my heart and in my head, I wasn't actually Switzerland. It was just something I was saying. I was saying, I'm Switzerland. And that way there was never any conflict. And my manager liked me and the team liked me. But in my heart, I was not Switzerland. In my head, I was not Switzerland. I was just verbally saying, I'm Switzerland, right? And I was seeing this swirl around me. And in my head, I'm like, oh, we're going off a cliff here. There's all these other ways. And it was actually when a colleague of mine, Dr. John Gardner, he came up to me at a professional gathering and he was like, you are a force. Like, don't forget this. You are a force. And as someone who he's caused good trouble in the space too, I cling to those words every day of my life. I hear him saying, you are a force, you are a force. So my roundabout way of getting to this is I think we also need to help people find their voice too, right? We need to tell young women or men or anybody, right? Like, your voice matters and we want to bring you to the table and hear what you have to say, because we don't pull up a lot of seats around this table. It's a very small cafe-sized table, right? And
We
if I'm
also have to switch the narrative in higher education, where I understand completely, because I'm still this way sometimes, depending on who I'm working with, that, oh, wow, I'm working with this organization. I'm so lucky that I'm working here. I'm so lucky with the esteem and the title and all of that. But they also are so lucky to have your voice. So instead of, I'm so lucky to work here, I don't want to rock the boat, that's not how it is elsewhere. Get rid of the shiny ivory towers for a second. This is a job and your voice matters. They're lucky to have you too.
Yep, totally. Totally. Yes, absolutely. So let's move on because we have so much to unpack here. I feel like we could end here, but we will we're not. Okay. So As someone who has studied systemic improvement and written about it, how do you define systemic improvement and why is it so prevalent in higher education versus other industries?
Yeah, great question. So, systemic improvement is understanding where the problems start, that root cause, and prioritizing what needs to be fixed from there in steps. So, get to the root cause of the problem, keep asking why until you can't ask why anymore, and then make steps and prioritize those steps to fix the problem. Why it's such an issue in higher ed is because institutions have complex, hierarchical, and bureaucratic structures that make finding the root problem more difficult than truly a game of Where's Waldo or Carmen San, Where in the World is Carmen San Diego? I'm really nailing myself as a 90s kid right now. But
I'm there
both
with
of
you. Don't
those
worry.
things. And finding the problem isn't always the main issue either. It's a big problem, but not the main issue. Really, it's about being in a vulnerable position of admitting that there is a problem at the root to begin with, and then conducting the meaningful secondary and primary research at the organization to understand why the problem is occurring. And then committing resources, we don't have those unlimited in higher education, to address these problems from the ground up, meaning possible changes of policies, procedures, or personnel that can make that or might be associated with the problem. And this includes also shifting priorities or holding other stakeholders more accountable more frequently, and admitting that just because you have a fancy title doesn't mean that you can fix the problem by yourself. You need to actually drive in the people who are impacted by the work to help fix the problem and get their buy-in too. So, in other words, the first step to solving the problem is admitting that you have one, and higher ed really struggles with this first step, never mind all the other ones that I just talked about.
Totally, totally. I mean, are you saying you can't just like slap a band-aid on it and it's fixed? Is that the claim you're making here? Is that we can't just slap band-aids all over higher ed and it's a fixed system?
I mean, Elmo band-aids are so cute and you can pile them on, but at the end of the day, if you don't put the neosporin on it, the scar is always going to be there.
Yep. Totally. Totally. When you and I chatted last week, we talked a lot. We have very similar feelings, right? Passion, so much passion for this field. So much passion for this field. From your perspective, what is happening in the current higher education system? And let's pick 2 to 3 major issues within higher ed and what you think led us to this point. Take us on this journey.
My goodness. Okay, well, let's start with the distrust from all stakeholders that touch higher education right now. I feel like we are in a very dangerous cycle of distrust, and it starts with employers who are receiving our students. The news is full, right, of disappointment right now from employers wondering where students went to school and what they've learned, and thus that makes them skeptical of higher education and compensating tuition. Administration and leaders of higher education institutions are very skeptical of governmental practices right now, and are very scared of governmental practices, and are distrustful of governmental practices, especially with the changes in administration right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? So there's distrust there. The faculty teaching the students, there are many things impacting how they are teaching students and what they teach students. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit more today, so I won't belabor that point. But the other side of distrust is that faculty don't trust administrators of their organization. So how can we work together and come up with uh, a cohesive system if nobody trusts each other within it? Faculty feel like admin's priorities don't match theirs, and academia's true mission is lost, and students are skeptical of higher education and what they're being taught and how they're being taught. And all of this distrust is really hurting our educational mission, keeping us in silos, and also harming our relationships with each other, which makes it very hard to work together. The second thing I will say that is impacting is that we continue to view students as customers, and it is impacting how we teach students on a daily basis, as well as how faculty assess them and then also have relationships with them. And the power dynamic, there's been so much written about this, has shifted so far that contingent faculty are truly fearful for their jobs every day. And so many will do just about anything to avoid complaints from students and these usually end up in evaluations, any complaints online or in the dean's office. And so they are very fearful that if they misstep in any sort of way or hold their ground, their reputation or possible employment may be jeopardized. And there's so much pressure right now too to be super compassionate and empathetic. And I love all of that. I mean, I think that all teachers should be empathetic and compassionate always and give flexibility. But this is going a little bit too far, I think. And I think that students need to be reframed as students, not clients, not colleagues, as students. And I feel like we need to get back to the definition of a student, one who studies at a school or college to be skilled in a particular future profession. And in this, faculty need to be able to teach well, discuss well, assess well, and have the conditions and support and able to do those things. And so I think we need to get back to basics a little bit more on that. And then the last thing I'll say is I think that we have a major problem with faculty turning on each other, and which is terrifying. I personally left X, I think that's what they call it now, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I personally couldn't take it anymore. I was experiencing academics going after each other at a degree that I've never seen, whether they disagreed with what another academic wrote or were opposed to their teaching and pedagogical practices or grading philosophies or calling out a colleague. It was savage and inappropriate. And I understand we're all under a lot of pressure, but students see what we put out into the world. And when they see us trashing or criticizing each other, they get the idea that we're all in competition with each other. And that's a very dangerous place to be. I never used to feel like I was competing with other faculty members until the last few years, and it's an awful feeling. And I don't think that we should be undercutting any of our philosophies, and we should be doing what we feel is best for our students. And that is what we should be doing on a daily basis and supporting each other and respecting each other's differences.
That was all so spot on. Something about me is I love to read Reddit. Weird. I never engage in Reddit ever. I've never posted in Reddit ever. But I'm deeply fascinated by the Reddit threads. And so I look at college students all the time. What are they talking about? And the other day, a student was talking about, their faculty member. I don't feel comfortable. This feels like a hostile environment, blah, blah. And a faculty member posted in this thread, well, we don't like you guys either. Just so you know, we don't like you either. Like, no, no, right? But I think that speaks to what you're saying is like, no one trusts each other. We're all tired. I see a lot of instructors who are like annoyed that a student might say, "Hey, I'm sick. Can I have a delay?" And I think a lot of that is our faculty, or, not a delay, but like, can I turn in something late? But I think a lot of that is like our faculty, they can't do that. Their grades are due this day. And if they're sick, they're not going to write to their administration and say, I'm sick. Can I turn in my students grades late? Because the wheels have to keep going and the grades are dependent on, enrolling the next semester. And so I think a lot of that too, what I'm seeing is just faculty are like, no, 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 I don't get this treatment in my job. So you don't get this treatment over here, but it comes out in a really nasty way versus just explaining that, right? Like, hey, I have a job to perform. I don't really get to miss deadlines. I think it's important that you keep your deadlines. It's just a nope, sorry, policy. There's no explanation of how this is making them a better human or a person, right? It's just perceived as nastiness.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that that's a really good point that you just made, and that just leans into the point also that students don't understand the bureaucracy or the hierarchies of higher education, and also there are different expectations depending on your background what you think higher education should be. And the pandemic did not help us in this
No.
case at all with lax deadlines, pass fail. Those are just some of the things that come to mind. But now that we're trying to get back to the original, practice of good things, we have to now, whether we like it or not, explain to students why things cannot happen and be a little bit more vulnerable instead of just the, nope, that's policy. That's not going to work anymore. That's students are going to go online and complain about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, What does the current response to student issues look like from we're kind of already talking about this, right? I've kind of led us to this question. What does the current response to student issues look like from faculty? But more importantly, are we trending in the right direction when we respond to student issues?
I don't think we are. Based on what I've experienced over the past couple of years, I don't think we are. I feel like we are leaning far too much towards appeasing students than actually responding to the problem at hand. And there's a difference, right? I don't want to I don't want to come off as insensitive because obviously I think students have very good points most of the time. Actually, 99% of the time, their points are very well heard and made. But we also, I think, jump to too many conclusions about the original complaint from a student and not going enough into detail about where that complaint is coming from versus what they say. A lot of the things that students say, we need to peel back the layers and the onion to try to find out what the actual problem is. And I think many faculty feel at a loss right now as to handle so many complex student issues and don't feel like they can teach like they need to for students to develop appropriate acumen, and nor do they feel like they can do or say anything right, so they play it safe, which can harm the integrity of a student's education. I don't think that many faculty feel backed by administration a lot now either. And so when a student complaint comes from higher up, they just want to fix it or squash it, or go back to our band-aid analogy, just put a band-aid on it so that it goes away. And I've spent a lot of time in my career backing faculty, unpopular, but backing faculty and making them feel supported despite pushback from students. And if the faculty did do something wrong, we would address it from a root cause perspective. One of the best compliments I ever received from a former adjunct on my team was that I had a way of addressing faculty mistakes in a way that made them feel both heard and good about moving forward and that they weren't going to lose their job. And I never forgot that. And I don't think that many faculty leaders are addressing things like that today. It's very much make the problem go away. And that results in a loss of faith and credibility and respect to the faculty member, not to mention harms their morale too, right? Faculty turnover is a problem for a reason, especially since the pandemic, and especially contingent ones that are always on high alert now in defense mode and wondering if they're going to be a headline or lose their job if they don't immediately kind of give in. And so I think that with adjuncts being over half of the faculty body these days, I think the number is even higher than that now, actually. The reasons for the turnover are more along the lines of I did this to want to give back and serve the next generation, and then later on it just wasn't worth it. And so to solve that, I really do think that when a student complaint comes in, we should not be immediately jumping to conclusions or assuming that students are right. And because there's two sides to every story, and those stories are layered with emotion and background and previous educational experiences, and we really need to make faculty feel important and valued, and their contributions to the field valued in that way, or else we're just going to be continuing 2 weeks before the start of a semester trying to find faculty to fill classes, and that perpetuates a cycle of being a lack of preparedness, and also students feeling that they're not getting their money's worth out of a class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes rigor or just wanting the best for a student is viewed as like punitive, right? And I do think there are unpopular opinion. I do think there are faculty who are just power hungry. I'm not naive to think that those don't exist, right? Like I know that it exists, and I know that there are faculty who are like, shut up and listen to my lecture, and move on with your life. But I think that's a very small minority. I think so many faculty, it's their heart. Like this is their heart work, and it's what all the feedback that they're giving is just to make students better humans, to make them better in their field, to make them better practitioners. Um, but their heart isn't seen in these scenarios, right? It's the complaint. It's the louder voice is the complaint. And so, yeah, we dismiss the faculty or um, we punish them when really the faculty is like, I'm just trying to I love these students. I'm just trying to make them better in everything I do.
And students don't see the value of that right now either. And I think that this is another polarizing
Mm,
conversation with faculty, right? To grade or not to grade? That is the question. And there are benefits and detriments to both of those things. And because it's such a subjective topic and there's no blanket policy for how to give grades earned, right? All faculty autonomy, and I respect that. But then in that, we all need to be respectful of each other's grading policies, whether you're from the ungrading community and you don't believe in grades and you issue a grade at the end of the semester because you have to based on your own principles. I think the ungrading community is amazing in what they're doing. Or you truly feel that you need to give feedback and progress acumen on certain skills. We need to respect each other, but we also need to prepare students for different types of teaching and different types of assessment so that, again, systemically, we're not this person against the other. This faculty grades this way and this one's more harsh. It's only harming our students and their development, not only in the field in which they are trying to pursue, but later on in life when we are serving them up to the world and they have one boss who's very nonchalant and then they have another boss in their next job where they get paid more, where they get tons of feedback and it's a little harsher. We're just not doing a service to our students.
totally. I when I was a kid, I'm gonna age myself here too. When I was a kid, we was like beat it in our heads. Feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. There were little pictures and it was like a present. And on the present it would say feedback. And so my entire life I've had this like paradigm of feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. So anytime I receive feedback, it's from the lens of this is a gift. I don't think they're teaching that today. I
No,
think they're
because
taking that out.
if you give too much feedback, which I've been criticized because I give too much feedback, and they had a teacher who didn't give that much feedback, then I'm overly critical, right? And I can totally understand that. Or you have a faculty member who gave no late work, no acceptance of late work, but then you get into my class and I give a 24-hour grace period. It's very confusing. I get
Totally.
it.
Absolutely. My child, Reagan. Sorry, my child is coming in. She
No,
stayed home
hi,
from school
Kerry.
today. Okay. No, I totally agree with all that. Okay. Sorry, slight interruption. Let's
No
get back
worries.
on track. Okay. So we can't discuss traditional structure without discussing curriculum and instruction. What are some outdated curricular practices and mindsets that are holding higher ed back from serving students? Let's do top three and how to overcome them.
So, number one, not working through backwards design. I do not believe you can teach well if you do not have the end in mind before you start designing a course. So, you start with the learning outcomes, which are the skills you want students to gain from your class at the end of the semester. So, basically, you're saying, these are the skills I'm promising you will have. And then you have the learning objectives for the class, which are teacher facing. How are you going to teach this content? What should they be able to do to acquire these skills by the end of the term? And then design the assignments around those outcomes and objectives. Then you design the week by week with active learning and readings, as well as the lecture content to support formative and summative assessments that they will eventually be graded or ungraded on. So that's number one, backwards design. We do not design forwards to backwards, backwards to forwards for sure. The second, I would say lecture based learning. This is also a hot topic right now. I truly feel, and this is research based, we need to move to having 12 to 15-minute top lectures before focusing on engagement activities that promote skill practice. And I read recently, I think it was in Inside Higher Ed, I'm not sure, I'd have to get back to you on that, or you can put it in the show notes, that students are actually asking for more lecture
Yes,
content these days because they're just exhausted. And it's just easier to listen to a teacher than to do group work and active learning because it's just exhausting. But we should not be caving on that. Students need to interact with each other. They need to, even in online classes, need to interact with each other and they need to interact with you. And we shouldn't be caving on that practice and interaction in the classroom because active learning is what leads to deep learning. And then my third is not effectively measuring participation. Might get in
Mm,
trouble for that one. But if I see one more syllabus with vague participation requirements, I am literally going to scream. First, it's engagement, not participation.
mhm,
Participation is highly tactical. We want to measure engagement, which is directly quantifiable. It's a response to a learning activity. So instead of how many times someone speaks in class and having a tally, we need to think about measuring how they furthered a conversation in the classroom or integrated the reading into the classroom conversation or responded to a classmate's comment about the material. That's what we want to be focusing on. And then I still believe, I know this might be number 4, but let's just say it quickly. I think that I know there's a lot of pressure right now about D and IJ in the classroom, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And I transparently am an advocate for making sure that every student in the classroom sees themselves in the content. And we cannot lose sight of that, because as soon as we start not being mindful of the diversity of readings in our classroom, the diversity of images, the diversity of conversations in our classroom, our students, the student makeup that we have now, will stop seeing themselves in their field that they're going to be studying or in the material and the subject matter. And we also will stop seeing them relate to the teachers in the classroom. And I feel like that's just a really important point to make.
absolutely, absolutely. I could literally talk about every single point you just as you were talking, I was like, I have so many thoughts on all this. Um, yes, the DEIJ. I mean, it's just good course design, right? Like, we don't even have to call it out. It just should be there. It should just be like a standard, a law, right? Um, and for the discussions or for the engagement, I want to note something that as I look through a lot of like online discussions where it's, users typing versus engaging in the class, I think schools are really failing students by writing really bad discussion questions. It's like, look in your textbook and give the top 5 ways that the author asks to do this. Well, then do you know what every student gives? The exact same answer, right? Then you're reading 40 responses of the exact same thing. And as you're a student, how do you even come up with a response when everyone has the same things? Um, and so I think that is a huge opportunity, especially in online learning too, when we're not doing these live group sessions, when all the discussions happen on a discussion board. Well, then we need to be better and we need to lead them in a better direction. That's not like a yes or no, but it's easy grading, right? It's
Yes,
easy. It's lazy in my opinion, but I digress.
agree. And also, it doesn't need to be a discussion question. It can be so many other things. I mean, I teach an asynchronous class, and I sometimes go overboard on the creativity. I'll completely admit that, where you submit videos and we have pitches on the board and there's podcasts from me and things like that. We need to think outside the box, because with online learning becoming more and more prominent for students and them wanting more and more online classes, we are training them in the way that we're designing them right now, that they are supposed to be read, video, discussion board,
Paper.
read, video,
Yeah,
discussion board. And so they're not, that flexibility and agility that we talked about earlier is not there for other types of online learning. And that's also a disservice to our students, because a lot of jobs right now, which they love remote work, and remote work, you got to be able to be flexible in the tasks that you're asked to do.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move us along because I could sit in this topic forever because I am very passionate about it. But as I was preparing, you wrote an article inside Higher Ed about how teaching centers shouldn't be dumping grounds. They're not dumping grounds. What do you mean by this? And how should institutions be using their teaching centers instead?
So I used to think wrongly that teaching and learning centers were the universal mecca for all schools, that they were a place where everyone at the university thought was the hub to teach teachers how to teach well, the advisors for leaders to call on when it came to curricular issues, and where the latest teaching and learning research were coming from. And since then, I've learned otherwise. There are some teaching and learning centers that are doing just the work that are basically paper pushers and administrators. They are the LMS help desk, and they're rarely asked to do anything that they thought they were hired to do. And it's such a shame and a waste. There are many teaching and learning centers around the country that should be looked at that are doing a great job. And they are the people who do all of the onboarding. They help with the strategic planning on all teaching and learning matters. They have a seat at the table at any meeting that touches teaching and learning. And they also are the people who help with teaching evaluation analysis and curriculum assessment and building. They're the people for this. And I feel like all teaching and learning centers need to get out of the paper pushing route and being kind of like secondary citizens at every organization. And instead of a go to the teaching and learning center if, it's you need to go to the teaching and learning center when. It shouldn't be as optional as it is. And the people working within the teaching and learning centers, their talents and skills, which are so unique and really build on everything that we've talked about today, getting to the root cause of how you should be supporting and facilitating teaching and learning. It needs to come from them. So that was the inspiration for that article, is to tell organizations to do better and to use them more efficiently and effectively. And that comes from the top down. So really the leadership of colleges and universities need to look at teaching and learning centers in a new way or in a refreshed way, and then promote that way to all of the people from the top down.
I totally agree. When I read that, I was like, this is genius, because they're just okay, let me backstep here. For a lot of schools, the CETLs are repositories, right? The CETLs are just like everything that we have for teachers lives here, and you're like hunting for files. It's like, oh, there's a student issue, so let me spend 2 hours looking through this massive space of documents to figure out how to solve this issue. So I think your analogy of like dumping grounds, it's a good one. This wasn't a question that I planned, but how did people react to it? To the article?
Depends on who you were. Depends on who you were. I think that, listen, here is my philosophy for anything that I write. I know it's going to create controversy. I want you to think. And everything I write comes from the heart to a point that I feel like if it's hitting you in a certain way, then it's time to look in the mirror.
Yep. I'm gonna leave a pause right there, because that was like a mic drop. Yeah, I mean, it's so often the natural reaction is just to react, right? It's like, oh, I didn't like that, because you're right. It got me somewhere. Whether I'm doing this and I'm being called out, or yeah, you're right. It's we react to it, and we're just probably because we're doing it.
And that's the first question I ask myself when I react to something that I'm reading too, is, oh, you better take this to heart because it's affecting you in a certain way. So
Totally. Yep. A great advice. Okay. So we've talked about issues, we've sprinkled in some solutions, right? But let's really get solutions oriented here, because what I don't want to be is the people who are always critical with no solutions. Now, I do think we've sprinkled them in, but let's really focus in on solutions here. So, my first question, solutions focused question. What advice do you have for faculty and administrators who are feeling disillusioned or maybe disappointed in their higher ed careers right now, um, because of some of the things we've discussed today, and maybe some of the things we haven't discussed today?
yeah, you're not alone, first of all. I feel like it's a very lonely place to be, to feel disillusioned, because there's so much that goes in to creating a career in higher education. There's sacrifice, there's schooling, there's investment, there's all of those things. And so you're not alone, is first and foremost. Second, figure out the root cause of why you're disillusioned. Is it something that can be fixed by speaking up, by advocating for yourself, by making a change? Figure that out first without saying, I'm disillusioned, I want to get out of this, which is happening a lot lately, just giving up, throwing in the towel, it's never going to get better. If I believed that, then I wouldn't still be in higher education. I would have gone back to corporate. And so think that through. And then do small things every day that make you feel good about the career choice that you've made. This is, adjacent, but Lang's small teaching, it can be applied so well here with, you don't need to be this outspoken advocate every day for everything that you want to change in higher ed. It's the small things every day that make a big difference to how you feel about yourself. And I told you even before we got on this call today, I've had a really rough week in higher education. I've been very disillusioned about what I've experienced. And I had a few moments this week where I felt down in the dumps. And I had to dig deep and say, why do you keep doing this? Why do you want to continue? And how can you make today a little bit different from yesterday so that you feel good about the career that you've chosen? Now, if you don't find any reasons anymore, that's a conversation you need to have with yourself. But I think that there's a long way before you get to that point.
That's great advice. Yeah, we were talking about this before this call. Like it's been rough. So I feel like, and I'm seeing it on LinkedIn too. A lot of people are like, it's rough. Can I just say that? And um so I think this is really practical advice for right now, because it's not just you and I who are feeling disillusioned and disappointed and enter every single verb surrounding, change and disappoint. Yeah, there's so many verbs we could enter here of our feelings. I guess adjectives is more of what they would be, but um, if you could get higher education leaders in a room and make them truly listen, not just in a room, but actually listen, what's the message you'd want them to hear?
If they want to see themselves in their role or one above that in the next 5 years, then they need to create systems where feedback is not only welcomed, but acted upon, and where educators like me, who care deeply about student development and educator development and making things better, aren't dismissed or gaslit when we challenge the status quo. Otherwise, you are never going to be successful as a leader in higher ed.
And that was another mic drop, but that's
It's
brilliant.
true.
It's so true. It's so true. Okay. Last question. What is next for you? Are there projects, initiatives, books? What are you working on that we should be watching? Because you have a lot of ideas, a lot to bring to the table. I'm going to be watching you. So, what's next for you?
Well, as you know, as I was exiting my last full time role, I was unfortunately diagnosed with thyroid cancer, which was an unfortunate collision of events. So, with surgery coming up and some other treatment, I've needed to put my next full time adventure on pause. But that does not mean that I'm not crushing part time opportunities for the next couple of months. So, I have a lot to be excited about. I regularly consult at higher education institutions on course offerings, including course creation and evaluation reviews. I'm also a whiz at course mapping, so I love those consulting projects. I do a lot of that. I teach online and in person as well in business and marketing and communications at a couple of great institutions. And I'm always up for dropping into faculty meetings to host workshops on a variety of topics. I have a couple of articles in queue as well, so look for those in the trades. And I have an overdue book proposal on preparing adjunct faculty for the realities of the workplace. But you can always find me and follow me and all my adventures on LinkedIn as well. I love to connect with academic friends.
Awesome. And I will put your LinkedIn URL in this description note. So if you're listening or watching, you can find Kerry in the description of this, and then just connect with her on LinkedIn to kind of see what she's writing, stay connected. Maybe there's some follow-up conversations that need to happen. Don't throw tomatoes at her, or only good stuff. Reach out to her for the good stuff. Well, Kerry, thank you so much. I think these are really important conversations. Not always easy to hear. A lot of people don't want to talk about them, but we need to keep having the conversations. I'm writing right now an article, because one article I wrote got a really good response, and I'm basically writing another article that's like, one article isn't enough. Like, we can't we can't like one article and think that that's sufficient. We need to keep it going. So I know that I just genuinely appreciate how candid you are, and your heart for the student, and how all of this is really just to help them, to help make a better environment for them. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It doesn't always make me popular, but it always makes me fearless, and I'm okay with that.
That's a great place to be. Awesome. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.